What's going on, everybody? We are live. Bills Chat live with Josh and Luka. I got the point right, Luka. It is our second favorite show of the year. It is mock draft night. The only other show that we prefer to this show, Luka, is the one that will happen this coming Thursday, which is our live draft spectacular that we are looking forward to. But tonight, we're getting you all prepared for the draft. And good news, if you're behind in life, and we've totally been there, and it's a situation where it's like you have not had time to cram for this draft, we got you. Luka and I have not only been talking about the Bills at nauseum, we will eventually get to the Bills pick tonight and talk about what we would do in that scenario, if what we would predict the Bills are going to do. Obviously, we have been looking at these teams in front of the Bills. I'm going to have the odds. Luka's going to have the evens. And we've been studying what these teams will do based on what the noise is around those teams. Luka, I know this is your favorite show besides the live draft show. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's our favorite week of the year when it comes to what we do, the fun we have with this Bills Chat show. It's chaotic in all the best way possible on my side of things. I know I'm doing a lot of different random editing things. I like to mess around with a lot of stuff, test out things, get things ready for the live show that we do where we're on air for 4.5 hours straight watching the draft, just, kicking it around. But this is the show where after we kind of take all the information we took in, with the different teams, like you said, we divide them in two. We'll conquer what we believe the draft board will be. But ultimately, as we have learned in years past and everything moving forward, no one knows anything other than maybe the first couple picks. So, this is just a fun time where, yes, we always do things with a Bills lens. But, Josh, I know you and I are just big NFL fans as well, and we can kind of enjoy the NFL as a whole in its entirety and kind of figure out what these teams are going to be doing in the first round and kind of take it from there.
Let's waste no more time. Let's get it started. And with the 2025 NFL mock draft Bills Chat style, the Tennessee Titans are on the clock, Luka, and I have this pick. I'm not going to waste a lot of time. If you follow the betting markets, if you follow the noise of the insiders, this one should be pretty cut and dry. The Tennessee Titans, they did not get their answer at quarterback a couple of years ago when they took Will Levis. They have a new regime there in Tennessee, and they're looking for somebody to build around. There seems to be a consensus top quarterback in this draft. It is the Miami University quarterback, Cam Ward. He is going to be the first pick in our mock draft. And Tennessee Titans fans that haven't had much to cheer about since Mike Vrabel left and really haven't had much stability at quarterback since Ryan Tannehill. They have something new and exciting there. They had the first pick in the draft for a reason. Now they have a building block. Cam Ward to the Tennessee Titans. Luka, not much of a shock in that one, I assume.
No, it's the one where I think there's even been reports coming out of late, whether it was yesterday, today, whatever it is I've seen, where I think it's all but locked when it comes to Cam Ward going to Tennessee. They have a lot of needs. Generally, when you find yourself in the first overall pick, you have plenty. But one of your main needs always is quarterback, and you have the lucky luxury of kind of getting your pick as to the best of the crop that is that draft year. Cam Ward is the clear number one in the quarterback camp. So makes a lot of sense.
All right. Well, with that, the Cleveland Browns are on the clock, and there's some very interesting ways they can go. Luka, you are representing the Cleveland Browns tonight. Which way are you going to go?
I'm going to be short and sweet. And obviously, since we have to go 30 picks, I think we're going to be doing that a little bit more than we usually would in this episode. But I think there's been a lot of late smoke of late as to what the Browns will do, and that kind of looks like they're steering towards the Travis Hunter thing. I will say this. If I am the Cleveland Browns and I am sitting at 2 and there's not someone willing to pay a ransom to trade up for my pick at 2, in my opinion, you take the best player available that also fills a great need. And as much as I believe they could use a skill player like Travis Hunter at the wide receiver position, as much as I'm sure he would bolster their secondary, I think, in my opinion, and I'll be updating the board just for anyone that's aware every so often. It's obviously going to take a little bit for me to do that. I manually will be making these. We did not share our picks, but I am going with what I believe to be the best player available, as well as someone that will be frightening opposite the guy they just made the highest paid player in the NFL. The best player, in my opinion, is Edge Abdul Carter out of Penn State. I think he is the best prospect in this draft. I think Travis Hunter is the most exciting and has obviously the versatility of playing two ways and all that. I just think also the comments we heard recently out of Cleveland, where they view him more as a DB. They're not sure what he would do in wide receiver, kind of in the wide receiver capacity, or I think it was vice versa another time where they're like, he's a wide receiver, we're going to treat him like that, and then he wouldn't be a DB at all, essentially. That to me screams someone that's not willing to work with the two-way. And also that just might be where they're not comfortable with someone that wants or is willing to be two-way. And when you have someone that's a gem like Abdul Carter also sitting there, I think that's the best way to go ultimately, because if it's not a quarterback, Josh, we have always said the next best thing is someone that can get to the quarterback, and no one better in this draft than Abdul Carter. So that's where I'm going at number 2.
You know, it's interesting. You don't hear anything about quarterback for the Browns, and you get it. Like, they're still tied to Deshaun Watson financially. I hear the same thing you hear. It's Travis Hunter. It feels like that's the way it's going. That's what I would predict if I was doing a predictive mock draft. But one thing I can't forget about Luka is this offseason feels like it's been a lot of how can we do right by Myles Garrett. They gave him a brand new contract extension after he let them know that he wasn't happy with his situation there. They're not going to be able to do much to fix the quarterback situation here, but the next best thing they could do is give him a running mate on that defensive line on the other side to take some pressure off him. And that's what Abdul Carter would give them. So there's something in my brain that says if they're still trying to make Myles Garrett happy, that Abdul Carter is the pick. But I still would predict that it's Travis Hunter. But as we transition now to number 3, this is where I think the draft begins. Because whether or not it's Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter at 2, the Giants are in a fascinating situation. And it's not too dissimilar from the situation they found themselves in several years ago, where they decided to extend Daniel Jones. And what ended up happening is, the story that's told, at least, is they could no longer afford to extend Saquon Barkley. I think that's a little bit of, that sounds cool to say. It's kind of pile on the Giants. But here's where I'm at with the Giants. There's been some late buzz that the Giants are interested in quarterbacks. That there's been some reports recently that they worked out Shedeur Sanders privately. I understand why a team that currently employs a washed up version of Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston would be all over a quarterback if you're picking top 3 in the drafts. Trust me, I do. I lived through the Bills' 17-year drought, and I was mad every year they didn't pick a quarterback. But what I will say is, one, Joe Shane and Brian Dable need to put results on the field this year. I think there's a world where they could take Shedeur Sanders if up top of the building, John Mara says, I can't sell mediocrity anymore. I can't sell Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston in 6 wins. If I get 6 wins with Shedeur Sanders, I at least have hope. If that happens, that trumps everything. But for now, what I think the Giants are going to do is they're going to take a deep breath and realize that the best quarterback in the draft is off the board. And the next grouping of quarterbacks are not too dissimilarly rated. And whatever quarterback they can either get at the top of the second round, or by trading back into the back end of the first round, say for like a Jackson Dart, would not be too dissimilar grade-wise from taking Shedeur Sanders here. While there are 2 consensus non-quarterback studs in this draft that are a cut above everybody else in this draft, it's Travis Hunter, it's Abdul Carter. I think no matter who goes off the board at 2 of those 2, the other one is going to be a Giant. In this draft, it was Abdul Carter that went to the Cleveland Browns. It says Penn State there in the graphic if you want to update that. But for the Giants, it is going to be the cornerback / wide receiver / Heisman Trophy winner out of Colorado, Travis Hunter, to the New York Giants, and they will figure out quarterback either later in this draft or next season. And that puts the New England Patriots on the clock. And Luka, the reason why I said the draft starts there is if the Giants had gone Sanders, the Patriots would get, I think, a top 2 player in the draft at 4. And now you have a situation where potentially the Patriots become a trade-up spot for a team that's desperate for a quarterback if teams view Shedeur Sanders that high. I don't get the sense that's the case. But I think we're also starting to get to the point of that draft already where you could have a wide variety of rankings on these players. And at this point in time, I wouldn't be too shocked from pick 4 till about pick 40 of the order of these players that they go.
4 is kind of that first, as you said. I think you painted it all perfectly, even when you weren't talking about the Patriots. 4 is the first spot where your 2 known studs are gone now with Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter, and your number 1 quarterback is gone, where there is clearly a step down to the next best available options. So 4 would be one where the Patriots don't have a glaring thing that they might need, or at least someone that they would view as a bona fide stud where it's a must turn in, like a Travis Hunter. If one of those 2 guys are there, they are going to be taking one of them, of course, but ultimately could be a trade down spot if someone else has the next best player they really want to get up to and go. And I'm sure the Patriots would take whatever return they'd get on that. In our world, we're going to be making this pick. I will be making this pick. And simply put, I had Travis Hunter there just in the off chance, in the very off chance Josh wanted to go crazy and go quarterback with the Giants. He did not. So therefore, in my opinion, you take the best tackle in the draft here, and that is offensive tackle Will Campbell out of LSU. The Patriots need a few things. Offensive line is definitely one of them that needs to be bolstered. And Will Campbell would probably come in and be one of their best, if not their best, offensive lineman right from the jump. Not that their offensive line was honestly as horrible as we thought it was going to be going into the season, but it still wasn't anything great. And really, they just need to you win in the trenches. We saw that with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl the way that they did, in the fashion that they have been winning the past few seasons. And the Patriots need to do something about that to finally protect Drake May. And then eventually you probably can find your weapons later in this draft to give him kind of outlets from there, because they are lacking. But you're not taking any other wide receiver at this position at 4. So tackle Will Campbell out of LSU is my pick here for the Patriots. You're on mute, Josh.
Oop, it must have kicked me on mute because a video started playing on this website I had open where I'm marking off who's getting picked. I think that's the pick too. I will say this. There's a part of me that wonders if the Patriots could go Ashton Genty. And it's the Mike Vrabel factor, where in Tennessee, he rode Derrick Henry to a lot of success with some mediocre quarterback play. But I think it's important to remember that as good of a prospect as Ashton Genty is, he is not Derrick Henry. He's bulked up like Derrick Henry, but he's not the same size. He's not the same profile. I wouldn't be stunned, but I think the Patriots, I think they're going to go for Will Campbell. I think at this point in the process, he has solidified himself as the best offensive tackle. And that's certainly what the betting markets are at least showing as far as who's going to come off the board first. And that is a good pick for you. So that puts the Jacksonville Jaguars on the clock for me. Boy, they have an interesting team. A couple years ago, they were viewed as like one of the best up-and-coming teams in the sport. And then, boy, it kind of fell off quickly. Trevor Lawrence is no longer viewed as like the prince, the next best thing. He's kind of hanging on by a thread for his career before he becomes a bust in the NFL. And, they went out and paid good money for Gabe Davis this offseason. They have a new GM in Gladstone. I think there's some paths. This is a team that did lose Evan Ingram. I think there's a chance maybe they look at a tight end here, but as my theme of the night is going to be, I don't necessarily think these tight ends are worthy of where some of the mock drafts have them going. And I think potentially the idea of what Brock Bowers was last year is polluting some people's brains as to what these tight ends could be. Brock Bowers is pretty generational, and we won't see one of those guys for a while. I think the Jaguars play it kind of safe here. This to me is a volatile draft. I don't see them as a team that's going to go after a quarterback, obviously. I think they're going to go another year with Trevor Lawrence before they maybe make a decision there. I look at this team and I look at what they have on the defensive line. They're good at edge, and they have some high draft picks in edge. Hines Allen, I don't think he's a superstar, but I think he's a star. They've spent a couple of high picks at edge, but they need that interior presence. And I think, Luka, this is going to be one of those draft classes that 5 years from now, we're going to look back on, there's going to be a lot of misses because there's just so many warts on so many of these guys, particularly after Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter come off the board. And I think the safest guy in the entire draft and the guy with maybe the highest floor, but I think a disrespected ceiling because of some of his measurables, is the defensive tackle out of Michigan, Mason Graham. I think he's going to solidify the middle of the defense for the Jaguars. He helps them build up front. They're in a division that has Jonathan Taylor. They have to get after the quarterback to do anything in the AFC. We saw that in the Super Bowl what can happen if you have a great defensive line with Mahomes. And, I think this is just a safe Smart move for the Jaguars. Bolster that defensive line and get what Lucas said is a notch above prospect in this draft when we did our defensive line show. And Mason Graham is going to be the newest member of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And now Pete Carroll's Las Vegas Raiders are on the clock.
Yeah, Pete Carroll's Las Vegas Raiders are on the clock. And simply put, there's no way to wind this up. This might be the chalkiest of all chalk picks. And a lot of me wanted to try to find another way to go with this pick. And I just couldn't, because I think there's a couple things that are in play when it comes to the Raiders. And simply put, Pete Carroll loves to start on the ground. It would agitate his Super Bowl winning quarterback when in Seattle, Russell Wilson, as he was still in the peak of his powers, whatever those may have been, that Carroll still wanted to emphasize defense and running the ball. And it's not like the Raiders are world beaters on defense, but there's a glaring need on the other aspect of that whole dynamic when it comes to a ball carrier or a workhorse that can lead that ground attack for you. And quarterback may be a concern for them. But if you were to draft, I don't know, Ashton Genty, at least you can have a guy you're handing it off to regularly that you want to have the ball in his hands. You're going to have him have 30 plus touches, most likely on the regular. And again, as I said, I wanted to go elsewhere. I thought that there might be a way to go when it comes to figuring out what the Raiders want to do. Maybe they want to just go with Shedeur Sanders and throw the book out the window and see what happens when it comes to that. You know, I say they want to have a ground game, they want to have a good defense, and all of a sudden you're drafting Shedeur Sanders. That's not exactly how you get to that. But really, I think the chalk that is Ashton Genty here at 6 just makes too much sense in the world. I said that this draft, there's a lot of unknowns. This feels like one of the more makes sense knowns to me that I believe you haven't seen anyone else talk about anything else at 6. And that there's a reason for that. I think the writing's on the wall, unless someone were to move up in front of them for whatever reason to take him to make sure the Raiders don't. If he is there at 6, Ashton Genty is going to be the pick for the Raiders. So that's where I'm at. And Josh, you're up 7 with the Jets.
Yeah, I do know there's some smoke about Shedeur Sanders to the Raiders because of Tom Brady's ties to Deion Sanders, but I think we're reaching there. Look at the contract they gave Geno Smith. Do you think Pete Carroll is coming out of pseudo retirement to mold a young quarterback? I think he wanted to win with Geno Smith, and I think they're taking their best shot. And boy, Ashton Genty is an exciting prospect. And again, similar to Mason Graham, in a draft that's going to have a lot of busts, it's hard to see how Ashton Genty busts. We are up at 7 with the Jets. And it feels like history is repeating itself for the Jets because there's a lot of directions they could go here. They definitely need another wide receiver. They could absolutely, positively take a quarterback. They certainly have a need there. We all understand that. But I look at the Jets in a very similar situation to last year, Luka. They're on the board, and they could either take a really exciting, highly rated tight end or go with solidifying their offensive line and going with a tackle. Last year, unfortunately for the Jets and really anybody that passed on him, the Jets passed on Brock Bowers for what I thought was the smart move at the time, taking the tackle Fashanu. And he had a decent rookie season. There's reason to think that he's going to be a good player. And now they're sitting here in a similar situation where they could take a tight end. It could be Warren, it could be Loveland, or they could go with a tackle. And Will Campbell's already off the board. But when I look at the Jets, and I look at Aaron Glenn specifically, he comes from Detroit, and Detroit was in the NFC Championship game 2 years ago. They were the number 1 seed in the NFC last year. And the best thing Detroit had going for them all along was their offensive line. And they spent some premium picks on the offensive line with Penei Sewell, Frank Ragnow. They had a dominant front, and the Jets have anything but that right now. You don't know what the health is of Elijah Vera Tucker. You hope that Fashanu can handle the blind side. But I think this is a regime that, as cool as a tight end would be, something I heard that just stuck with me is, when's the last time you thought a team in the NFL was bad because their tight end wasn't good enough? It just doesn't happen. Great tight ends are a luxury. They aren't the reason. The bad tight ends aren't the reason why your team is bad. If you don't have a good offensive line, it can absolutely be the reason why your team is bad. I don't think the Jets should chase the ghosts of Brock Bowers here with a tight end, either in Warren or Loveland, that are just not near the caliber of him. I don't think they will. Instead, I think they go right back after the same offensive line, try to give Fashanu a running mate. They're going to go to the University of Missouri and take Armand Mimbow. I probably pronounced the name wrong. There was a point in time, Luka, when he was rated ahead of all the other tackles in this draft. But at this point in time, that is not the case. Will Campbell appears to be the highest rated one, but the Jets are going to take him at 7. And while they don't have quarterback figured out, whenever they do put a young quarterback there, they should be able to protect him. And that's the pick for the Jets.
It's funny because I actually had him as my option 1. So as I think I've told you over the years when we do this episode, I always write out 2 options for each that you're picking from. And then once we get past like 10 to 12, then I start doing 3 options deep. And I had him first over the tight end that is Tyler Warren, just because I believe the same thing. And I think this is a year where we're going to see a lot of teams finally understand what is a luxury and then what is necessary. And the Jets, even though they could use a lot of that when it comes to what Tyler Warren can provide them as a weapon, and then you have what looks like Justin Fields being your quarterback, you need to just get better on the offensive line. The trenches need to get better for the Jets, especially on the offensive side. So overall, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So with that, though, the Panthers are on the clock. And the Panthers, as I just said, you're going to see a lot of teams smarten up and finally realize what they're going to need to do in the trenches. This is not a team that I say is smart and understands what they need to do. I think ownership, it's when we were doing this, Josh, I learned that I seem to somehow luck out with getting both the wonderful ownerships, that is the Carolina Panthers, and later on I will be the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones.
Ooh.
To what we know as stalwart, phenomenal ownership positions, and everything that they do makes a lot of sense in the world of the NFL. This one, though, with the Panthers, this is one I kind of had to think long and hard about. Are they finally going to understand what's necessary and what they need to do? Bryce Young finally showed maybe something at the quarterback position late last season. Are they going to be able to turn a corner with that? Are they going to be like, hey, maybe we really need to do something to even help him further when it comes to protecting him, providing him the time needed, all of these things that allows him to excel? Or are you going to now think, hey, that we are one weapon away from doing this, and all of a sudden you have Tyler Warren, you have Tet McMillan in your lap, ready to go at pick 8. This is what we're going to do. I don't think that's the smart route to go, but because it's not the smart route to go, that's the route that I believe the Carolina Panthers will be going. Tet McMillan is someone that I've seen mocked up to them, and I laugh every time I see it, but I laugh also because it makes so much sense for what the Panthers think they need to do in this pick. We went over how you and I both, and I think I'm a little stronger in this, feel about Tet McMillan and how he's a little underwhelming in everything that he does. And that feels like something the Panthers are just going to ignore. And as you put it perfectly, he's just someone that a lot of NFL teams and execs drool over when it comes to the potential and the measurables and all of those things. That, yeah, I'm going with wide receiver Tet McMillan out of University of Arizona here. Oh man, that just felt disgusting saying that college name. But yeah, it's not the right pick. I don't think it's the smart pick for the Panthers. In all honesty, I think they should be trading back if anyone's willing to trade up with them at this point in time. But realistically, since we are picking here, I just don't think they'll make the right decision. And I do think that Mason Graham is in play here if the Jags weren't taking him at 5 because they were going heavy. It's a fun note. A lot of IDL, interior defensive line talk when it comes to the Panthers, but Mason Graham's the clear guy to go for if that's possible. He's not on the board. So yeah, Tet McMillan's the pick for the Panthers here at 8.
I mean, I echo everything you're saying. First of all, this is what we're doing. We're not telling you what Josh and Luka would do. We'll tell you that Thursday if the Panthers pick Tet McMillan, we'll both tell you that we wouldn't have done that. We are telling you that our research on these teams is pointing us in that direction. And, Luka dove deep on the Chargers a couple of years ago and had a pretty good feeling they were going to go Quentin Johnston over Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison, and they did. So I could see it. And boy, a year after taking Xavier Legette, I mean, why not? At least if you're going to take a receiver, take a different style. But hey, you do you, Panthers, and the rest of us will just reap the benefits. Speaking of reaping the benefits, the Saints are on the clock. Luka, there's been some stories coming out this week One, it became more of a national story that Derek Carr is not going to be ready for the start of the season. And that got a lot of the betting markets to think like, oh, wow, the Saints are going to be in on Shador Sanders if he were to fall to them. And in our mock draft, he has fallen to them. But let me tell you how my brain works, Luca. Why would that story be coming out the week of the draft? It certainly isn't because the Saints just found out about it this week. No, they would have intel on that for weeks. So it's like, who would want that to get out that the Saints are after a quarterback? Well, let's think about why the Saints would want that out. One, if you want Shador Sanders, you have to get in front of the Saints to get him. That benefits the Saints because if you get in front of him and take a player they don't actually want, it pushes somebody down to them that they want. Or two, maybe you trade up with them and they trade back. And so I started digging a little bit deeper. And Nick Underhill is a name that if you follow NFL circles is a name you might recognize. He is, in my opinion, the most plugged in Saints beat writer that there is. And he reported this week that the Saints have done next to zero work on Shador Sanders. No visits, no talking. Look, I get some of that stuff can be smokescreen. You're not drafting a franchise quarterback without doing any kind of legwork on him. That's just not the way it works. In fact, his read is that the Saints are much more in on Jackson Dart, who you're not going to take at 9. You might. Last year threw us all for a loop. Michael Penix Jr. in the top 10. But I don't get the vibe that the Saints are going to be necessarily quarterback hungry here at 9, unless they get desperate and they're afraid that Dart won't follow them at the top of the second round. And instead, I think the Saints are going to take advantage of what Minnie is going to view as a miss by the Panthers here. And they are going to go with why can I not find my list here? There we go. Out of the University of Georgia, what many consider to be the second best pass rusher in this class after Abdul Carter is Jalen Walker. And Cameron Jordan's not getting any younger. The Saints certainly in that dome, it can get loud. And if they ever have a lead, you'd like to have some pass rush help. And I feel like there's not much we know about this class, but it feels like we're starting to get the feel that Jalen Walker is kind of a cut above the rest of the muck, where he's not Abdul Carter, clearly, but he's kind of in that maybe Mason Graham, Ashton Genty group of you won't take him in the top 3, but you feel pretty good about the fact that he's going to be a good player in the NFL. The Saints play it smart. They get their pass rush help, and they tip their cap to the Panthers, who did them a solid.
It's funny that you went Jalen Walker there. That's actually I did see an edge coming, Josh. I will say that. I love you bringing up all of the you really believe that all of a sudden they just found out that he's going to be out for the year?
Yeah.
How do you not know that about your quarterback? I love that because that's exactly where my head goes as well. But at the same time, Jalen Walker, it's not that it's a bad pick, but it's an interesting one for sure. It throws my options for a loop. I didn't even have them written down for you.
All right. I'll say real quick, Jalen Walker, I don't know what to do with him because every time I watch Georgia, he popped. I feel like he's a scheme-specific pass rusher in the NFL, but I just can't deny the fact that every little thing I look under for the NFL draft, his name is the one that's like, he's going top 10. He's going top 10. So at some point, it doesn't matter what I think. And I thought he was excellent in college. I just think he's a scheme-specific 3-4 edge rusher, which might be kind of odd, but the NFL seems to view him as the second best pass rusher in this class, and that's where the Saints are going to get him.
Yeah, I find it funny too because there's actually another edge even on Georgia that I prefer over him. But we're not
measurable wise for sure.
We're not talking about us though. We're talking about what the NFL and what our rumblies are. All right, we're on to 10, which is the Bears. And I want to preface and start this with if the board works out in the way that it does, and I brought this up to Josh right before we went live. This is the pick that I truly believe when I was I was like, the Bears aren't picking at 10. If the two best tackles being Will Campbell and Armand Membau, however we want to say it, we'll find out on draft night. If they're off the board, I don't believe the Bears are taking anything. I think when you have this new regime come in and there has been a clear emphasis on offensive line and getting Caleb Williams more protection and more help, and they're trying to rebuild that Lions model now in Chicago, I think that's what they're going for. The next best tackle is who I will be taking here. But realistically, do I believe that will be the pick at 10? Most likely not. I think this is going to be a trade out. But we don't trade in this mock. And I am sitting here as the Bears GM. I don't know why I can't think of his name at the moment. I always knew his name. But anyways, I'm the Bears GM. And the offensive line is everything that it comes out of there. Every single thing. I think there's an off chance if Genty, for whatever reason, doesn't go off at 6, like everyone in the world believes that he will go. Maybe the Bears are in play for Genty, but realistically, if that is not possible, the pick here is offensive tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas. He is the next best available offensive lineman, offensive tackle as well. And Ben Johnson is clearly, as I said, doing exactly what he did in Detroit, or he wants to do what he did in Detroit. And that all came from the offensive line being as dominant, as physical, as athletic as it was, that he needs to replicate that and fast in order to provide the protection and the ease of mind when it comes to what is going on in front of them for Caleb Williams, their franchise. And that's why you have to do that. If Will Campbell or Armand Membu are available, they will go with them. Since in this situation they are not, and we don't trade, Kelvin Banks Jr. is the pick here at 10 for the Bears. You're on mute, Josh.
Oh, I actually wasn't saying anything. I was trying to think about it. I think that's a good pick, though. I thought there was a chance that maybe they might go tight end, really, to try to help out Caleb Williams. But really, I mean, they have enough receivers there.
Do they need a 14th tight end? I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. And they did just pay Cole Kmet, right?
Yeah. Yes, they did.
Woo. Okay, so that brings us to the San Francisco 49ers. There are a number of ways this team can go here. This is a team that a couple years ago looked like the most talented team in the entire NFL, and that moniker now appears to be taken over by the Eagles. I think when you look at the Niners, I think they need to start replenishing on the defensive side of the ball. I realize they lost Deebo Samuel, but they have Brandon Ayuk. They have Ricky Pearsall at receiver. They have Christian McCaffrey at running back. They're going to pay Brock Purdy. George Kittle just got paid. I just don't see this being an offensive pick unless there's concern that Trent Williams might not be able to give them much more. But as Luka just said, the third offensive tackle just went off the board. Do you want to take the fourth offensive tackle with pick 11? And so then I look at the Niners and I'm thinking, okay, what does this team need? They certainly need a cornerback. They lost Tre'Davious Ward. There's two good cornerbacks on the board right now. Will Johnson would make a lot of sense, particularly in that Robert Saleh scheme. That would be a way that I think I would want to go. But boy, this Niners team, Luka, they love them some athletes. They love them some freak athletes. And there's a guy here that I don't know what position he's going to necessarily fill for them. Do I want to do this?
You got it. It makes all the sense in the world.
You're thinking the same thing I am. And it's just like, I would not take him this high. There's such a projection here. But boy, oh boy, are they the team that would just roll the dice on this talent, because if he had any kind of college game film, he would be a top 3 pick. The Niners are going to go with freakish athlete out of the University of Texas A&M, Shamar Stewart, edge rusher, and they are just going to add to their defensive pipeline. He may not help them a lot this year, but he's somebody that they put in the pipeline, and they're hoping that 2 or 3 years from now, he's the guy that's next to Nick Bosa that's bringing that defense back to prominence. I think they could have gone cornerback, but I think when you look at the depth of this class, they probably think they can get a cornerback later in this class, and there's just not going to be an athlete, particularly an edge rusher, the caliber of a Shamar Stewart here. They roll the dice in a big way, and they get themselves a player that if he hits, look out, because he can be as good as anybody in this draft.
Yeah, I love the edge idea when it comes to the Niners. And then, as you said, they love intangibles. They love attributes. They love things you can't coach, because then from there, they believe, especially Bob Saleh and that entire defensive coaching staff believes they can mold you into exactly what they need you to be. And when you have someone of his kind of intangibles and build, you really, if he's sitting there on the board 11, it's just for the Niners, it feels like it's best player available. All right. I mentioned how dysfunctional ownership was on my board when doing my research. We are at the dysfunctional ownership, the dysfunctional GM position in this league. The Dallas Cowboys. Josh, would you define the Dallas Cowboys as an organization that's predictable and does their due diligence and far depth research and makes the right play when it comes to draft night? Or do you find them to be a little bit what we call emotional and headline grabbing need and all of those things? First or the second?
Oh, the second. And they almost took Johnny Manziel just because Jerry Jones got excited when he didn't even need a quarterback. So, yes.
So, in my time researching the Dallas Cowboys, I saw nothing other than they want to make a splash. They want to grab someone that is going to sell jerseys, be a name they can revolve, build on its offensive side of the ball, and it is a weapon. And they are going to take a weapon. I will say some of the names I even had listed here were Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina, which at 12 would be interesting. As much as I like Omarion, don't get me wrong, but I had Tyler Warren written down. But there's also someone else that played their college ball in this state, Josh, that just feels like a Jerry Jones pick here at 12. They need to get someone that is the Robin to the Batman, that is CeeDee Lamb. And you have Matthew Golden out of Texas sitting there. That feels like such a fun prospect. If Tet McMillan were to be sitting here, I think Tet McMillan would go. But ultimately, the other dysfunctional ownership at 8 took him. So Jerry Jones, and honestly, I could still see Jerry Jones going Matt Golden. Anyways, that is the pick I'm going with. I've seen other individuals like a Daniel Jeremiah, I believe, at one point had said that that's the route the Cowboys will be going. They're looking for that flashy receiver. They need that secondary receiver outside of CeeDee Lamb to get back to the offensive prowess that they once had. I can understand the thought process, but when you're at 12, when there's other players around that are better, the smart decision is not Matthew Golden. But we're not talking about a organization that's stable and understands how to make the smart pick here. We're talking about the Dallas Cowboys, and we're talking about Jerry Jones. Wide receiver Matthew Golden out of Texas is the pick here at 12. And honestly, you mentioned how I sniped the Chargers pick a few years back. This one feels like the one that I might be sniping. And I mentioned the chalky Ashton Genty. I mentioned the Tet McMillan situation. Matthew Golden just reeks to be a Jerry Jones pick at 12. I don't know what it is. I honestly can't give you any rational explanation other than the fact that it's a Texas wide receiver that he feels can be dynamic in his state, sell jerseys, be opposite of CeeDee Lamb, and think that he gets them to the greatest show on turf 3.0 or whatever he wants to call that offense in Jerry world. Because, yeah, that's going to be the pick.
So we did our wide receiver show. What was it? Last episode, our weapons show. And you said that Matthew Golden was not rated as highly for you as Tet McMillan, obviously Travis Hunter or Luther Burden.
Yep.
And so while from one standpoint, you could say, boy, this is going poorly for the Bills, 3 receivers off the board already outside of Travis Hunter, who they never had a chance with. There's really no painful shots. Tet McMillan, I don't think people thought was going to make it to them anyway. And Matthew Golden has never been somebody I've been obsessed with. So I get it from the Cowboys standpoint, particularly the Texas angle. And the Cowboys tend to kind of shock the world on draft night. So we shall see. The Bills division rival, the Miami Dolphins, are on the clock. And it's been an interesting offseason for them. As now the word on the street is they could be trading Tyreek Hill at the draft. They could be trading Jalen Ramsey at the draft. This is a team that even if they don't trade Jalen Ramsey, they could absolutely still take a cornerback. And I look at this Dolphins team. There's a few needs here. One, they probably need an interior offensive lineman. And I'm referencing my buddy Eric, who's a diehard Dolphins fan. He is my source for a lot of this stuff because he's in the weeds on them. They need an offensive guard to go opposite James Daniels. And Daniels is a guy that has not been able to stay healthy anyway. So even if he can stay healthy, that's kind of a roll of the dice. But I don't think there's an interior offensive lineman you want to take in the draft at this point in time. The Dolphins absolutely need an interior defensive lineman. I think someone like Kenneth Grant could absolutely appeal to them here. But the problem is, as my buddy Eric said, this is the deepest interior defensive line class he can remember in a long time. And the guy you get at 13 might be similarly rated to the guy you get in the 40s when you pick in the second round. But what the Dolphins can't probably get in the second round is a cornerback that's as good as either of the two that are staring them in the face right now. And whether or not they trade Jalen Ramsey, they need a boundary corner. Kader Kohu is a guy that went outside last year for them by necessity, but I think everybody views him as a better slot cornerback. They need a boundary cornerback. I think it comes down to one of two guys, Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron. Jahdae Barron is a better athlete. If you think he can play boundary for you, I think he could be the pick, particularly with the tape Johnson put out there last year. I think the safe pick here is the pick that the Dolphins are going to go with, and it's going to go with the defensive back out of the University of Michigan, Will Johnson. He comes in, he immediately starts for the Dolphins. I think they do trade Jalen Ramsey at some point during draft weekend, and the Dolphins get younger in the secondary. And, they need to be able to stop people at some point. And it's going to start with a guy like Will Johnson, who at his peak could be a shutdown zone cornerback. And I think that would be a strong pick for the Dolphins, although I might slightly lean Barron. But I love both those guys.
So I actually had you going Barron here. I'll just be transparent on that one. Barron does feel kind of like a Dolphins safety nickel, can play whatever, do whatever. He's a freak athlete, as we've talked about before and everything. But the Will Johnson one was my second option here. And it makes a lot of sense as well, especially if you see them move Jalen Ramsey. I don't think that will matter when it comes to them going DB, as you mentioned. But ultimately, yeah, that's Will Johnson makes a lot of sense. I see nothing wrong with that. We're now moving on to the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts, I don't have any other way to say this. They have a quarterback problem. They really do. When you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And when you have the two quarterbacks being Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson, you have a massive quarterback issue. What they need to do is make their life easy. And simply put, I don't know how they're going to be able to attack the middle of the field with the way the roster is currently constructed. I don't see how that is possible. You have Michael Pittman, you have Alec Pierce. They're not just strictly jump ball guys, but they thrive in the boundary. They thrive, downfield or just on the boundary outside the numbers. That's where they can live and breathe. Now you see, of course, Michael Pittman kind of attack high point, do whatever he needs to do, even over the middle of the field, but he gets killed a lot doing that as well. And I'm pretty sure they would like to keep him on the boundary so he doesn't get killed. Josh Downs, great slot guy in this league. He's very dynamic. I also don't know, though, if he's going to be kind of that. He got easy completions from Joe Flacco, but I think Joe Flacco was just smart enough, as old as he was, to just always make sure he put it in a safe spot for Josh Downs. And realistically, you didn't see too much going on, but Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones they're not savvy enough to understand what they need to do with a Josh Downs. So what can you do to make the quarterback's life easy, Josh? You're sitting at 14. The couple wide receivers have gone, but there's one individual, one name we've mentioned that I definitely believe the Colts are interested in and would be very happy if the board broke down this way. That's tight end Tyler Warren. He will make either quarterback's life a lot easier. I think it's a great fit as well for what it's worth. I think Shane Steichen will love to get his hands on a Tyler Warren. He will love to add him into the mix. When you think about Colts tight ends, it's funny that the first name that comes to mind is still Dallas Clark and not anyone they've had since. Even though they've had some freakishly big guys that can fill those roles, they never are really impactful enough for them to kind of make a big difference in this league. And Tyler Warren will finally feel like one of those guys that can truly provide them, all three downs. He's a great receiver. He's a dog over the middle, and he is a big enough guy where he can most likely handle the run blocking and everything else you need. Tyler Warren was a fun watch with Penn State, and Steichen, I think, will be very, very excited at 14 to get him here. So, yeah, tight end Tyler Warren. This is another one I feel very good about if the board falls the way it is, if he's not taken before this, that Colts will not go past the Colts. Warren is destined to be a Colt at 14 if it were to break out this way.
There's so much noise about the Colts taking a tight end, and apparently they were in on Bowers last year, but they ended up going with Letu. Mm-hmm. They certainly the need is there. It just the betting market seems to think they're going to take a tight end. So I mean, when everything points that way, it makes me think they can't all know this, right? But it makes too much sense. Like you mentioned, they need another weapon in the passing game, and a lot of times, like the cheat code easy button for quarterbacks is that tight end. So maybe that could even help Anthony Richardson. I will say it's interesting that Shedeur Sanders is still falling. Uh-huh. Doesn't surprise Josh or Luka because we're not high on him, but I guess I'm a little surprised by this, but we shall see. He's not going to go to the Atlanta Falcons, who just took Michael Penix Jr. last year and still have Kirk Cousins on the roster. This Falcons team is in an interesting spot too because they have a lot of weapons on offense. They have the young quarterback in Michael Penix, who certainly flashed at the end of last year when he took over for Kirk Cousins. But boy, oh boy, their defense couldn't stop a nosebleed last year. There's several different areas they could go on defense here. But I look at this Falcons team and I just think that what they have got to get better at, and what I think that their number one priority is going to be, particularly if this guy is still on the board, is rushing the passer. And, they don't really have to go too far up the road to snag this guy. He played college football in the same state that the Falcons reside in. Luca referenced him earlier when I took Jalen Walker, and he said there was another Georgia edge that he preferred, and that's who the Atlanta Falcons are going to go with. They're going to go, he's going to stay home in the state of Georgia. They're going to take edge rusher Mykel Williams. Now, look, he doesn't have the production that Jalen Walker had, but he's not a project. He's a good player. He absolutely dominated Texas, and he's got the length and the athleticism that NFL teams drool over. And I do think that for the 15th pick in this draft in particular, this is as solid of a pick as you could get for the Falcons. And, depending on how you view the rest of these edges, whether it's James Pierce, there's just things to dislike about a lot of these edges that are going to come off the board later. He's one of the last clean edge prospects that are there. I think the Falcons take him, and they're good to go with him.
I like you saying he's the last clean edge prospect, because that is what he is. And it's also weird saying that when you think about how James Pierce Jr. is still there. He might be one in some people's minds that is still, but I do believe he's fallen in the way that he has because he might not actually be that.
Mm-hmm.
And I trust that. But yeah, I think edge for the Falcons is just a must. They need to address this. It'd be a travesty if all the edges, including Mykel Williams or Mykel Williams, are gone and then they're kind of left on an island on not knowing what to do here. So I think in this scenario, it worked out well for them. All right. It's another team that I do enjoy on Sundays, and I am up. This is the reason I am the even picks here, Josh. The Arizona Cardinals are on the clock. This might be one of the first years in a while for the Cardinals that I'm not truly confident as to what they're going to be doing. I don't think there's a clear consensus on what they ultimately need. I think there's a few things they do need. I think interior offensive line is definitely one of them. There's definitely someone in play at that position that they could be going, but that's not the way I'm going to be going here. I think that their defensive line has been lacking for a long time. They signed Calais Campbell kind of to do a welcome back, whatever you want to call it. He wanted to come back. He's not going to be exactly the most impactful, although I don't think he's anyone to, ignore, but he's up there in age and everything. You're not expecting 10 plus sacks out of the guy. He will make some sort of difference. I think there's a lot that could be going on here. I think they could use more playmakers, but ultimately you drafted wide receiver 4th overall last season. And for what it's worth, you drafted an edge late in the first round last season. So now as I keep digging here, I think Josh Gannon needs to do something with this defense to finally really start to get it. He did one thing where they're very athletic. They were very aggressive. There was a lot going on. I think the defensive line is they want to see what they got out of their late first rounder last year out of Mizzou, whose name is blanking. I know it starts with a D, but I'm just blanking at this moment. They want to see what they're going to get out of him. Unfortunately, he was injured and couldn't really play at all last season. I think there's a lot of other things going on, but I think the DB situation in Arizona is a problem. I think they drafted a couple corners last year that were okay. I think they need time to develop and everything like that. They have Budda Baker, but Budda Baker's not getting any younger. He's still a guy right now. He's still great. He's on the trade block, it feels like, every season at the trade deadline because the Cardinals are underwhelming. But overall, he's still good. They have another safety opposite of him that's solid. But they don't really have this, I call it defensive weapon, Josh. And this is going to break my Bills' heart to make this pick. But this is a pick I feel like the Cardinals will make. This is a Josh Gannon pick. This is a pick that I can kind of smell a little bit. But as I said, I'm not exactly confident because I'm not sure what direction they ultimately going to go. I will say I was very close, very, very close to having them taking Gray Zabel, the guard interior offensive lineman out of North Dakota State. But that's not the direction I'm going. They're going to be going with corner, safety, defensive weapon, Jahdae Barron out of Texas. That is, he's a guy that just reeks Rich Gannon 20, when he was an Eagle, that utility safety nickel, does everything, can stand in the box, fly around for you, do everything you need him to do. He checks all the boxes. And if he's sitting there at 16, I don't think a guy like Gannon's going to let him go any further. I just think that's the way it's going to be. He's going to emphasize defense. The defense is a problem that they need to correct as much as they possibly can. And you don't, those kinds of guys, Barron, do not grow on trees. And ultimately, I think he can be one of those guys to truly pump up the secondary, both from a physical nature as well as a coverage and athletic side that will ultimately elevate their game on the defensive side of the ball, that I truly believe will eventually be what this pick is at 16. So Jahdae Barron out of Texas, he is off the board as he is now an Arizona Cardinal.
That's a great pick. I know it pained you on some respects because it's a second best landing spot for you.
Right.
From a Bills standpoint, though, these last couple of picks have been pretty depressing with Will Johnson and Jahdae Barron coming off the board, unless the Bills signing Tre'Davious White makes you think that cornerback is no longer a need. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see me shaking my head. I would not be surprised if Dane Jackson outranks Tre'Davious White on these Bills when the season starts. I think there's some heartbroken folks in Cincinnati, Luka, because I think Jahdae Barron made a lot of sense for the Bengals. Let's oversimplify the Bengals based on the research I've done. Offense good, defense bad. This is a team that lost a handful of games last year where they scored 30-plus points. They need help on defense everywhere. They fired Lou Amarino, and they brought in Al Golden, who loves running the nickel 4-2 defense as his primary defense and loves having multiple players that can play multiple positions on their defense. And that's where I thought Jahdae Barron would be such a foundational piece for that defense, whether it's going back to safety with Dax Hill or playing that nickel cornerback spot, the Taron Johnson role for that Cincinnati Bengals defense, or just ultimately being a boundary cornerback for them. There's so many roles you can put him in, and he's a moving chess piece on defense, but he's not there. That's not the world we're living in this mock draft. So what the what the Bengals are going to do is they are going to still look for that type of player. But unfortunately, there's not a lot in this class. And they could go back to the cornerback thing, but at this point in time, I think you're looking at cornerbacks that are just a notch below. And I had this name written down, and it's very much bothering me. 1 second, folks. This is okay. There it is. I had this. This is my backup pick all along, and I couldn't find it. The Bengals need everything on defense. Okay, but the last two drafts, they have drafted defensive linemen, and then they drafted defensive tackle and Mims this past year. They drafted Marcus Murphy the year before, and they have the situation going on with Trey Hendrickson. People seem to forget that he is still a Bengal, so it's not like they have to force the thing at edge. This is a deep class when it comes to defensive tackle. I think what the Bengals are going to do, which I do think this is a position that gets devalued, middle linebacker. It's one of those positions that when you have nothing, a middle linebacker can change the face of your defense. If you don't necessarily think that your team is ever a linebacker away, but if you need your defense to go from really awful to at least respectable, you put that middle linebacker in there that can run all over the field and that can cover, can blitz. And there's one guy in this draft. And this guy, if he wasn't coming off of an injury, I think would have been top 10 consideration. That's how good of a prospect he is. He's an old school linebacker where he's bigger. He's like 230 pounds, but he also has the speed and flexibility to drop into coverage and cover tight ends in the NFL. Out of the University of Alabama, the Cincinnati Bengals are going to choose what they hope is their defensive captain for the next 10 years, Jihad Campbell. And they absolutely have got to stop some teams on defense these days, because that's what cost them a chance to get into the playoffs. And they're going to make one step toward that. They would have loved Jahdae Barron. They pivot to Jihad Campbell, and I think that they're okay with that pick. And I think he has a chance to become an instant impact player for this Bengals defense that quite honestly needs about 3 or 4 of those.
Yeah, it's actually crazy. I actually like Jihad Campbell. I feel like a lot more than him falling to 17, but at the same time, the way you're seeing this board drop, it's a lot of, as I think we can expect, where there's a positional ranking in the NFL and your Mike or your stand-up linebacker kind of falls down a little bit, those rankings. And we talk about it all the time. Quarterback's number one. Guy to get to the quarterback, edge rush or pass rusher, interior defensive line, if they kind of are a specialist in that, number two. From there, you need people that can guard their weapons, corners, number three, the weapons themselves, wide receiver. It's just naturally the progression. All of a sudden, they're just not there. But yes, I love that pick, honestly, for the Bengals. I wouldn't like that pick when it comes to the Bills, because that is, I believe, to be a solid pick for the Bengals to start to get their defense fixed. All right, we're at 18 here. I think this is going to be one of the least sexy picks of the entire draft. I think the Seahawks have done a lot when it comes to, they brought in Cooper Kupp to pair with JSN. They did lose, wow, why am I blanking? They lost both receivers that they had, but I don't believe that with Lockett and, oh my God, he's a Steeler now, but I'm blanking. Oh my goodness.
DK
Anyways,
Metcalf.
DK Metcalf. Thank you. How do you forget DK Metcalf? That's embarrassing. Anyways, I don't believe they're going to go wide receiver here. One, I don't think that there's a receiver that a lot of teams value at this position anymore on the board. I think this is where a Matthew Golden creates that cutoff. Maybe they go back to the Ohio State pool and go with Emeka Egbuka. I don't believe that's where a lot of teams will have them on their board. And for whatever reason, I don't believe people will have Luther Burden this high on their board. I am not a GM, so that doesn't exist. I don't know how. They also, fun fact, they did sign Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So for anyone, that's in my notes. I laughed at it. I think that's funny. Wrapping up, least sexy pick. There was a guy I mentioned 2 picks ago that I believe the Cardinals could have been taking. Realistically, that's not where they can go because they already picked Jahdae Barrett. The Seahawks are going to be celebrating as they draft interior offensive lineman Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State and moving on with their day. And Seahawks fans are going to be the ones you first see on draft day going, okay, and just going on with their lives, because really, how can you sit there and be excited about an interior offensive lineman? He's not a bad guy. I just don't think the board works out very well for them at 18. I don't think the Seahawks really have things figured out for them when it comes to what they would be able to take. There are other guys there that I think are much more warranted to the 18. I think this is also a place, if for whatever reason a team's getting itchy that they still see Sanders sitting there, as we've broken this down, that they could easily look to call the Seahawks, and the Seahawks would be happy to move back, because again, I think this is an awkward spot of the board overall. And from what I gather with the Seahawks, I think they're going to try to do BPA, but also they do feel like they need a little bit more help on the offensive line. So they're just going to take what they believe to be the next best offensive lineman. And for whatever reason, that also appears to be Gray Zabel. That is not how my board breaks down, but that seems to be a consensus liked pick there. So Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, that is now the Seattle Seahawks pick at 18.
I like the pick. I mean, at this point in time, I'm not going to hate many picks that teams make unless they, go into the draft and take like somebody we had ranked in the 7th round. Why not? But I think when I look at this next team on the board, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there's different directions they could go. They just drafted Clancy last year to pair with Vita Vea, so they're formidable up front. They have Tyron on the edge, who's been okay, not great. They could really use another edge rusher. They could use a linebacker. They absolutely could use a linebacker. They brought back Levante David last year for like a run it back season, but I think they would have been all over the linebacker pick that the Bengals made in Jihad Campbell, but he's no longer on the board. And I think that the linebacker ideas are gone now at this point in time. And when you start looking at safety, they're a team that their safety play really struggled last year, but that was more so due to injury and not lack of talent. So, do you want to panic and take a safety in the first round just for depth? I don't see that. I think the Bucs are probably, they're really good on wide receiver. They brought back Chris Godwin. They had a good draft pick last year in McMillan. They're obviously good at running back. They're very happy with Baker Mayfield. I don't think the Bucs overthink this one. I think they go back to the defensive line, and they're going to look for an edge rusher that they hope that can hopefully come in, make an early impact, and help them close out some games. Because boy, oh boy, their defense, similar to the Bengals, really struggled to close out some games down the stretch last year. I think there's some momentum for a defensive tackle. I just don't see it with the Bengals. I think they're going to go with the edge out of the University of Marshall. They're going to go with Mike Green, who, if he was a little bit cleaner off the field, I think would be rated a little bit higher in this class, but some concerns about him have pushed him down the board, and potentially the Buccaneers get somebody that could be a bit of a steal if you can keep his nose clean off the field. Mike Green is the Buccaneers pick at number 19.
Yeah, he's the next best available edge at this point in time, and realistically, that's just what the Bucs are going to do here. All right, 20, Denver Broncos. This is one, after all my research, I am terrified of. And I know I say that, and Josh understands exactly why I'm saying that, because this is a pick I can easily see going one way. I think there's a lot to be said when it comes to what the Broncos are going to do. And it feels like they feel very confident with everything as it stands when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. So they are going to go offense. How they go offense, though, is up for grabs a little bit. I am very torn between two guys here. I think I'm going to go with my gut and go with what I believe Sean Payton is going to do, because that is the guy who's making the call, for one. And I think ultimately they feel more confident that they need to go with, and I will have a sigh of relief at this point in time when I see this position group taken. They're going to go with running back over wide receiver. I really, truly believe it's going to be one of those two. There's a 50-50 shot. And there's a 50-50 shot I'm going to be very heartbroken on draft day if at 20 I hear the other name said. And I'm not going to say it because I don't want to jinx it. But I believe that they're going to go with running back. Sean Payton is going to want to get someone that is much more dynamic in that backfield than what they currently have there. Yes, it's a deep running back class, but I think there's a guy that feels like a Sean Payton guy sitting here right now that he is going to. He already showed us he's very comfortable with, perception-wise, reaching for his guy because he's in love with him. Bo Nix, at the time, to some, was felt to be a little bit of a reach where he was taken. It was a little bit surprising, but he loved him. And I think there's another guy that checks a lot of boxes for Sean Payton. That is running back Omari and Hampton out of North Carolina. I think it's a pick that makes a lot of sense for them, both in the now and the future. As I said, I can easily see them going wide receiver. Ultimately, they will be going with a weapon to furthermore bolster what is surrounding Bo Nix in the weapon capacity. But I just think Sean Payton is seeing this guy and loves everything about him, and then sees what's in his current depth and what he has available to him. And I think that was a massive, massive problem for them. When you saw them in the wild card in Buffalo, they had no threat whatsoever. I mean, the Bills were welcoming it to an extreme capacity of, please try to use your running backs in this place and do something with it, because we feel like they will not be able to do anything for you that is positive, and we will have an easy game, which it was for the Bills overall. And I think Denver just needs to do something to bolster that position. So overall, to get their running back one, Omari Hampton will be picked here at pick 20. And I believe him to be the only other running back in this class that has some sort of valid argument to be a first rounder. So he is the guy here at 20.
Sean Payton has a history of taking running backs in the first round. Did it with Mark Ingram, did it with Reggie Bush. And I think this is one of those classes too, where I don't think there's a real world where Hampton is a bust. It just comes down to how high do you want to take a running back? And they had nothing at running back last season. So I don't blame them for this pick. I trust Sean Payton's eye when it comes to offensive players. Their defense was as good as it gets in the entire sport last year. And their wide receiver group really started to come on when you saw Marvin Mims get more involved. You saw Troy Franklin take the Bills deep on the first drive in the playoffs. So this pick makes a lot of sense to me. Pick 21. Luka, back in 2004, the Steelers sat tight and there was a deep quarterback draft, and they stood at pick 11, and Ben Roethlisberger fell into their laps, and they took him. They didn't move up for him; they got him. Fast forward to 2025, and the Steelers' depth chart. You want the good news or the bad news? The good news is they have two quarterbacks on their depth chart that have actually played in playoff games against Josh Allen and started. The bad news is those quarterbacks are Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson. And if the season started today, that is who would be the Steelers' starting quarterback. There is the news out there that Aaron Rodgers probably is going to Pittsburgh if he's not retiring. I guess there's still a window for Minnesota, but even if Aaron Rodgers is your answer, Luka, that's a 1-year answer. That's not 1 year and beyond. And this is not a Steelers team that, unlike a team like the Giants, who foregone quarterback earlier in this draft, and you could think, well, they're probably going to pick early enough next year to have a shot at Arch Manning or somebody like that. Carson Beck. I don't know who it's going to be next year. This is a Steelers team that under Mike Tomlin does not have losing records. They consistently make it to the playoffs or close to the playoffs. And even if they were to roll out a Mason Rudolph, you would expect them to win 7, 8, 9 games and not be in position to draft a quarterback. So that's all a long way of saying that they're sitting here at pick 21, and there's only been one quarterback off the board. And you and I don't love Shedeur Sanders, particularly in the top 5. But when you're sitting at pick 21 and your in-house options are Mason Rudolph or Skylar Thompson, and whatever's left of Aaron Rodgers potentially, my oh my, do you need to add to the pipeline? So for me, the only conversation that needs to be taking place in Pittsburgh is, do we like Shedeur Sanders better than Jackson Dart? And which one of these guys do we want to take here at pick 21? Everything that I understand about this draft is that Shedeur Sanders is a better prospect than Jackson Dart. Everything that I saw in college would tell me that Shedeur Sanders is a better prospect than Jackson Dart. And that's what the Steelers are going to do. And you know what? I don't love Shedeur Sanders. I think it could work with Mike Tomlin. My biggest concern about Shedeur Sanders, I think he's a talented player. I think if Shedeur Sanders were a high school report card, he'd have B pluses everywhere. My problem is he doesn't have any A pluses. And I think that there's some good and bad about being Deion Sanders' son. There's a little bit of a personality there that I just wonder how it's going to work in the NFL. But boy, oh boy, falling into Mike Tomlin's culture and Mike Tomlin's program is like the perfect landing spot. I think this could absolutely work. And at pick 21, it's absolutely worth the swing here. The Steelers take their quarterback, Shedeur Sanders, and they get themselves some very much needed leverage against Aaron Rodgers. I could absolutely see Shedeur Sanders being under center for the Steelers week 1 in this scenario, Luka.
Yeah, he's fallen enough where it has to happen. It's someone needs to. I will say, I think I've seen a lot of rumblings of Jackson Dart going here. And what I think would scare the shit out of the Steelers brass is the last time they took a guy similar, although I think Jackson Dart is better, but similar to Jackson Dart, it was Kenny Pickett, and that was a colossal fail. So now you need to do something different. And I think they already had a taste of something different last year when they tried the old Justin Fields experiment. And then they thought they were getting the best of passer and mobility. Well, we learned it wasn't good, but mobility with Russ Wilson. They want to be someone they want someone under center that can be mobile, that can do the things that they do in the modern NFL. When you see the Josh Allens, the Lamar Jacksons, Lamar Jackson's in your division, shredding it up in 2 ways, they need something else that's dynamic. And I love your point about, I believe in Tomlin, similar to the way you make it sound. So it just makes a lot of sense. If he's there at 21, I think that's the pick. And if Deion has any say in it, I bet you Deion's very happy with him going to a traditional powerhouse that is the Steelers, and to Mike Tomlin for that matter. I'm sure he loves Mike Tomlin. Okay.
Deion Sanders is smart enough to know that, you want to be the first pick in the draft and go to the Tennessee Titans. Cool. You want to go to a team that has a chance to be in the playoffs this year and start making headway on that second contract? Get me to Pittsburgh. You may not make enough. You may not make as much money early on, but holy cow, if you play well, you're setting yourself up for a mega deal down the line. And I think this is a perfect landing spot.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. But I somehow get the Chargers once again, Josh. The Chargers have fallen into my lap. And it feels like I just apparently have a pulse on the Chargers that I need to make sure I live up on the expectations of that. That said, I think the Chargers have one thing and one thing on their mind when it comes to this spot. And ironically enough, Josh, it's wide receiver. They are going to just take who they believe to be the next best wide receiver on the board for them to make things happen. And if it were my board, this would be Luther Burden. He wouldn't make it to the Bills. He would be landing at 22 on our board that I am visually showing you here. It's just so close to the Bills, right next door. But that is not the NFL's board, and that's not what I believe to be the Chargers board. I think Harbaugh got to watch someone else when he was still at Michigan that he enjoyed, that he thought was dynamic, and is someone that can definitely be a threat for him, that overall I think can instantly come into the Chargers and at least be a plus weapon for this team. I think there is a real chance that they also could go tight end here. And you have a guy that Harbaugh is also very familiar with sitting there, that he would love to get his hands on it once more in Loveland and continue to go with that whole ordeal at tight end. But I don't think that's where they're going to go here. I believe, going back to it, they're going to go, as I have it written down here. I'm just making sure I have it. Yes, this is where I had it here. Emeka Egbuka. And I think this is a little bit of a surprise to some, but overall, I think them bringing back Mike Williams, hilarious. 1, 2, it's not enough. We know what Mike Williams is. We saw what Mike Williams could be or lack thereof in 2 other offenses last year. And it's like, okay, the reality with Mike Williams is he's a great jump baller who also has health problems, what we always knew him to be in the first place. You bring in Najee Harris, whoopity-doo, at running back, but they still need some dynamic playmakers. And I think Emeka Egbuka is a guy that can provide them a few different dynamic traits overall that Harbaugh has seen firsthand in front of him across the field in one of the biggest regular season games in the college football landscape every season. And I think there's something to be said with that when he saw that at his days in Michigan, that he wants to bring him in here. He will see him at 22. And ultimately, even though Loveland is sitting there, his tight end, he's going to go with Emeka Egbuka here because the wide receiver position needs to be addressed, and some with that Quentin Johnston guy that I also sniped before, really kind of being a hit or miss kind of guy out wide when it comes to his hands and ability to actually be a receiver. So need to bring another body in-house here, and I think Emeka Egbuka checks a lot of boxes that Harbaugh and the Chargers would like to bring in.
They desperately need a receiver. I mean, Ladd McConkey was a home run. You're right. Mike Williams doesn't do much to move the needle. Quentin Johnston had he had a decent season, but a lot of that was, I mean, none of it was overly impressive. It was a scheme him open, and then he did some stuff with the ball in his hands or wide open targets. They need another weapon on the outside, and that pick makes a lot of sense to me. All right, Luka, we're going to go to the Green Bay Packers. There's some talk this team could take a wide receiver. I guess at this point you could see Luther Burden being that guy because, they had a hard time keeping their guys healthy last year. They're not going to go that direction here. I mean, this is a team that at this point, until they take a wide receiver in the first round, I'm just not going to think that they're going to do it. They desperately need a cornerback. Jair Alexander is way up in the air. Eric Stokes is gone. And they need somebody to cover the boundary when you look at being in a division with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Roma Dunze. There's a lot of names there. So I think you start looking at it, and the 2 best cornerback ideas are already off the board. I think another area they could go to is defensive tackle. And this is one of those situations, Luka, where I think best player available would be a defensive tackle, whether it is a Walter Nolan, or I know a player that's been mocked to Green Bay a lot has been Derek Harmon, the defensive tackle out of Oregon. But I don't love going need, but I will say when you have such a glaring need where it feels like your team could not even function, have a starting lineup out there on game day, That says something to me. And right now, the Packers have a desperate need at cornerback. I think they're going to fill that with a guy out of Kentucky, Maxwell Hairston.
Mm.
I think he's a guy that could come in, start right away. He's got some great upside. It's a little raw, but man, they're just desperate at cornerback right now. And in the NFC, in the NFL in 2025, if you have a bad cornerback situation, good luck stopping people, Bills. And I think this pick actually hurts the Bills because another cornerback comes off the board. But this is a guy that I have a sneaky suspicion might be pretty popular in Green Bay. If I had the GM card, I'd probably go with one of those defensive tackles because I think very highly of Walter Nolan. I know you do too.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not me, it's the Packers. And when you have such a glaring hole, I think you just have to go for it.
Yeah. I feel like the need of corner in Green Bay is so massive that they're almost showing their cards when it comes to the way they're going to go with this. It makes you can't go any other way. I think you said it well. All right. Vikings are on the clock here. Gonna be short and sweet with this one. Whew. They need secondary. And I think corner would be a place they would go, but I don't think a corner makes a lot of sense with how the board is shaking up. And yes, they might have Harrison Smith back there. Harrison Smith has been there for a very long time. They need to figure that out. They have gone safety in the past as well with blue chip level picks, and they haven't worked out. There was one guy who found himself on the practice squad for the Bills recently that just didn't work out. Although he wasn't a first round pick, he was still, I believe, a second round pick. That is Lewis Seen, someone that we liked going in. I feel like, too, when it comes to the Vikings, simply put, they love athletic attributes and they love freak athletes and they love guys who just jump off with all the intangibles, again, with that word and that kind of the way it's said. And there's someone we talked about during our prep here, Josh, that when you didn't hate him, but you were just like, someone else is going to fall in love with him just because of his measurables and everything. And I don't necessarily see it. There's some questions with him that don't make me feel like he's a first round kind of guy play wise. It sounds like a Viking to me because they're going to think that they can figure it out. Safety Nick Emanwari is going to be a Viking. This one they're going to take another swing at an athletic freak of a player and hope that he's going to work out because they need to address the secondary and address it quick because it might not be the worst in the NFL, but it's aging and it's not getting any better anytime soon. At 24, I feel like Nick Emanwari, I'm hoping I'm saying that right. It feels like the appropriate time for him to go and be a Minnesota Viking. I think it's the two sides will come together here. And it just makes a lot of sense in my eyes. So yeah, that's where the Vikings go at 24.
It makes a lot of sense to me too. I mean, I guess there's safer safety picks they could go with, but they have a type. And, they have the luxury of having a Harrison Smith in house that he can play behind while he learns his ropes. Texans are on the clock. And boy, this team made a lot of moves on the offensive line this offseason. They signed Cam Robinson, which I guess that will fill the hole left by trading away Laramie Tunzel. But Robinson's only on a 1-year deal. He's been hurt. And, I think when we last saw the Texans on the field, CJ Stroud went from being superstar rookie to, wow, he's really struggling sophomore year. And the majority of that was because they just could not keep him clean in the pocket. They have to find a way to keep this kid clean. They've ruined quarterbacks in Houston before by failing to address the offensive line. Go look up Derek Carr if you're not old, or David Carr if you're not old enough to remember who that was, Derek Carr's brother. And despite trading away Laramie Tunzel and signing Cam Robinson, I don't think Cam Robinson is a long-term answer. The Texans were hopeful that one of the first-round quality offensive linemen would fall to them. And at pick 25, they get what could be the last standing offensive tackle with a first-round grade on their board out of the University of Ohio State, Josh Simmons. Now, look, he doesn't have the highest upside, but I think he's plug and play. He's a good run blocker. He's a good pass blocker. You put him on the field game one, I think you're going to be just fine with him. He might need some tight end help early on, but I think I think he's a guy that has a chance to be a 10-year starter for you on the offensive line. Will he ever be all pro? Who knows? But you got to protect your franchise quarterback. CJ Stroud was too good rookie year to let what happened to the offensive line last year happen, and then to compound that by trading away Laramie Tunzel. The Texans start to correct some mistakes on draft night, and they add some offensive linemen to their pipeline.
Yeah, it's Josh Simmons. They have to go offensive tackle. They have to go offensive line in general. It'd be mind blowing to me if the Texans don't go elsewhere. All right, Rams are on the clock. Rams are one that I kind of struggled with. I'm just going to be frank. I struggled with because conventionally they need defense. That's where I think they need to go. They made it all the way to the divisional round, and they had some young guys step up on the defensive side of the ball that really came out of nowhere to help them with that. But there's still a lot of needs, and I think the number one need they really have is off-ball linebacker. The problem is there's really not one worth taking here at 26. You had already taken the one in Jihad Campbell, and there's a very noticeable drop-off from him. So from there, where do you go next? I think corner is the next place that the Rams would go. And I think the Rams very much want Maxwell Hairston. I think that's someone that they've circled. They have a lot of love for. And in this world, the Packers were just lucky enough to get him at 23. So that screws up their plans. I also think there's one other guy that they like in this position here. I'm sure they like Will Johnson. I'm sure they love Travis Hunter. They're not in a real world that they can take them. Trey Amos. Trey Amos is someone that I think the Rams really like. I think Trey Amos provides them a lot of stuff that feels like corners they've had and currently have. He fits a mold, but he's even a little bit more dynamic when it comes to his athleticism overall, that it feels like a scheme fit. It feels like it would work a lot. And ultimately, I think he's too good for them to pass up here at 26. This is probably going to upset a lot of Bills fans. But ultimately, I do believe if the Bills really want Trey Amos, they need to get above 26. Because if Trey Amos is sitting there on the board for the Rams, they will be taking him. So yes, cornerback, Trey Amos out of Mississippi, the University of Mississippi, will be the pick here at 26.
I think early in this process, Trey Amos was a guy that Bills fans targeted as like a second round pick. But as we've gotten closer and closer, I think it's becoming more and more evident that he is not going to make it to the second round. I think we're much more living in a world where he's going to go maybe even before the Bills pick. And that's going to be disappointing. All right, listen, the Ravens are on the clock. And the Ravens are the kind of team that seems to always luck out in the draft. And I think they create their own luck because I feel like they take their needs and they just kind of toss them to the side. And they just take the best player available. They did it with Kyle Hamilton. They did it with Tyler Lindenbaum. They didn't necessarily need a center that year. And I think there's a couple ways they could go here, but I'd be curious to know what their ratings were. When you look at their secondary, Malachi Starks is a guy that just feels like a Raven. He's a guy that could come in. He could kind of mirror and match some of the stuff that they do with Kyle Hamilton to a lesser extent, where he can play the nickel, he can play the deep, you can move Kyle Hamilton around, moving chess piece, and you can kind of, it frees up Kyle Hamilton, which is what we saw last year when Hamilton was able to go back and just concentrate on safety. That was when he played his best ball. But I keep thinking about this Ravens team. And then I think about a guy like Walter Nolan, who I think could very much be like best player available. And there, you could make an argument they need him. And then I keep looking and I'm thinking, what would be a Ravens pick here? What would be a Ravens pick? A sneaky need by the Ravens this year is offensive guard. And when you're talking about the 27th pick in the draft, you don't mind taking a guard there. They have good tackle play. But this is a team that wants to run it down your throat, and they want to build the best offensive line that they can possibly build. And I don't know if he's the best guard in the draft, but I think he's the best guard in the draft for the Ravens. Out of the University of Alabama, Tyler Booker is a massive run blocking machine that when you get him and Patrick Ricard out in front of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. Good freaking luck, defenses. You think it was fun to try to stop them last year? Let's put this machine out there in this Ravens offensive machine. And I think the Ravens go a little bit more into need than they normally do. But this is a team that sees a window with Derrick Henry still here at current time. Mark Andrews. I don't care if they trade away Mark Andrews. They're not going to go with Lovejoy because they have Likely, who they're very high on at tight end. I think this is a team that is going to look at the depth of the defensive tackle class and think that they can get one later. And I think that they're going to cue in here on an offensive guard in Booker. I would be curious, though, what they think about Malachi Starks, because I don't love him, but, you've heard he's a potential top 10 pick. I don't see it, but, I mean, he's sitting there at pick 27. That would feel like a Ravens pick, but for me, it's Booker.
No, I think there's it's not even necessarily like massive concerns with Malachi Starks, but you also hear stuff where the Eagles feel like they have a legitimate look at Malachi Starks, and the Eagles are, of course, sitting at 32. And from there, if the Eagles get a rumbling that they believe that they could be in the Malachi Starks thing, which would just be classic Eagles, Howie Roseman just gets another Georgia guy. Just keep loading up that defense with Georgia guys. I think, yes, the top 10 talk that could even potentially be there for him doesn't make sense to me. All right, this is the most layup of layup pick this deep in a mock draft. Detroit Lions need one thing and one thing only. They need an edge. They need a guy that can go opposite their superstar that unfortunately missed a massive chunk of the season and yet was still rated the number one edge on PFF. They need someone else that, if for whatever reason something happens, it's not a total drop off that lets up and just completely kills an entire season for them. That should have seen them go a lot further than a one and done in the playoffs. And we mentioned this guy's name earlier. He was at one point in time, it was probably going into this past college football season, known as the best edge of the draft class. He has fallen. There have been others like Abdul Carter that have just absolutely taken over. There are others like Shamar Stewart that are just freaks. Not a whole lot of kind of tape to go along with it, but the intangibles are there themselves. But James Pierce Jr., Josh, is sitting there for the Detroit Lions at 28. And how in the world could they look at themselves in the mirror and go elsewhere and think that that was the right thing to do? So at 28, James Pierce Jr. sitting there, and you have such a glaring need for additional pass rush and an edge opposite of your absolute superstar that you took early in the draft just a few seasons ago. Yeah, you got to do it. There's no other ramp up needed for this. The Detroit Lions at this position, the way this board is drafting, is James Pierce Jr., and they will be signing that card very quick.
Yeah, I'm a Pierce guy. I love him in a dome for a team that's going to have a lot of leads. He's a pin your ears back kind of guy, and you can't double team him with what they have going on in Detroit. So that fit makes a lot of sense, and that would be a strong pick for them. Trey Williams with a question in chat: does high end cornerback talent fall off faster than defensive tackle talent in the 25 draft? Yes, absolutely. The cornerbacks, there's three of them really, right, Luka? It's Travis Hunter, obviously, if you view him as a cornerback. There's Will Johnson, and then there's Jahdae Barron. And then I think, depending on what you think of Amos, he's the fourth guy, but you could go 10 deep at defensive tackle and get arguments on these guys being first round picks. And cornerback, you're really starting to stretch a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. The corners really do have a bigger plateau to them than the defensive tackle, interior defensive line, really defensive line as a whole. I think there's a much bigger shelf for a lot of those guys, and then it's a progressive fall off. Whereas corner, there is, I mean, as you can see our board here, you have your Travis Hunter, you have Will Johnson, you have Jahdae Barron, and we mentioned these other guys who are going to be taken. But realistically, the gap between a Jahdae Barron and a Maxwell Hairston is a significant enough one that I believe it to be a serious plateau. You finally go from an athletic, dominant player in Barron to Hairston, Hairston. It's so hard. I want to put that I afterwards. Hairston, who he's athletic, he's great, but there's question marks. There is concerns. There's things you need to mold, and that can be said at every position, of course, at some point in time. But realistically, I would say James Pierce is probably a more finished product, and we're well deep into the edge class and the interior defensive line, whereas you might not see a lot of them here. Well, you actually only see one. There's still quality interior defensive linemen here that they only probably fall due to people viewing them all closely enough, as Josh pointed out recently, I know with one pick, where it's just, how do you warrant taking that when you feel like you could still get a good enough guy at your next pick later on day 2? So yeah, it's a good question though. You're on mute.
Ooh-ha. We have the Washington Commanders, and then our Buffalo Bills are on the clock. So I'll go pretty quickly through this one. We can get to our Bills pick. I do think that the Commanders would have been all over James Pierce. There's the school of thought they could go after a wide receiver here. I guess I could see that. I mean, why not feed their young offensive star in Jaden Daniels? I know that Zach Ertz is not getting any younger. Perhaps they could go with a tight end out of Michigan and Lovejoy. But this is a defense that really struggled stopping people last year. And I think for this Commanders team, one thing they really lacked last year was pressure on the quarterback. Their number one, their number one pressure guy, sacker, was Dante Fowler, and he left via free agency. This is a team that I think is going to dip into the defensive end pool. Maybe this is a guy you have a second round grade in, high second round grade on, but you're picking 29. I think he has a high upside. Boston College University, Donovan Ezeraku is going to be the newest member of the Washington Commanders. And, they got to find a way to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. They got to find a way to, continue to beat teams like the Detroit Lions when they're fully healthy. The Minnesota Vikings aren't going away. The Packers aren't going away. So you have to get pressure on the quarterback if you want to you have to be good at the line of scrimmage if you want to survive in the NFC these days. And the Commanders take a step toward that at pick 29. All right, Luka, the Buffalo Bills are on the clock at pick 30. And I think the edge rusher idea has certainly taken a hit with these last couple of picks. Cornerback, I think, is in a tough spot. A lot of folks hoping for Trey Amos to fall. That'll be a disappointing outcome for a lot of people on draft night. You compound that with Maxwell Harrison coming off the board already. What is your favorite idea for the Bills right now? Let's just kick it around like we're in the war room. There's still a couple of good names at defensive tackle. Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant sitting right there. There's still some cornerback ideas out there. There's Malachi Starks at safety. If you're somebody that thinks Taylor Rapp is maybe nothing more than a one-year Band-Aid, or maybe you haven't seen enough out of Cole Bishop, or you want Bishop and Starks to be your safeties of the future, we've kind of talked about on the offensive side of the ball, there's really only one position that the Bills could target given the state of their roster, and it would be receiver. And at this point, I think whether it is the big boards, our board, or whatever, the name that's standing out there is Luther Burden, unless you're a Kyle Williams truther, which you or I are not. So Luka, what's your brain thinking right now?
I circle 3 players, and you mentioned 2 of them. So I circle 3 players ultimately for the Bills that make a lot of sense here. First and foremost, if I were sitting in there, I'd be turning in the card very quick, I will say.
Same.
And it would be Luther Burden III. That it would just be, that is what we need to do. This guy he screams ceiling of top 10, and I'm really concerned on how he's there at 30, but concerned in the sense of how did we get so lucky? I love the Walter Nolan idea. Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant.
Luka will leave.
Let's please not redo that.
Good job, Weston. We appreciate that. Oh, and he's a Chiefs.
Yeah. No,
that's a good shot.
I think we still get people that stop in, Josh. I for anyone out there that watches this even later, or if you're watching this now, I go into the YouTube studio. I see your comments. I might not reply to all of them, but God damn it, I see them all. So overall, I know we get some visitation of other fan bases. I will just leave it there. Anyways, Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant are the other 2. I'll morph them into one that I'm thinking. But there's one other name that I will say that I think is, this whole time I can't get it out of my head, that I think is a real chance at 30. I think there's a lot that's fascinating about this individual that we talked about him before in a previous episode when we brought up DBs, Josh. Siobhan Revel Jr. Yeah. I don't know what it is about him.
I do.
Okay. Let me preface this. there's something about him in the sense of he does feel like a Sean McDermott. Like there's something that they would love in him, and corner's a clear need. And it's like, man, 6'3", 4'4", flat, like freakish athletic attributes. He checks all the boxes in the world, it feels like, when it comes to the intangible side of things. So you went with someone you believed to be incredibly smart, film, tape, all this stuff, but it just wasn't a scheme fit, and it never worked out in Kyrie Elam. Siobhan Revel Jr. feels like maybe someone that he might not have that film study, or he might not think he knows too much, where you can just mold him into what you need him to be. That I think the curiosity is very much there for the Bills at 30, that if he's sitting there, they might pull the trigger. But ultimately, that's where my head's at. I think it's Luther Burden, it's Kenneth Grant or Nolan, or it's Siobhan Revel Jr. That is where I think the Bills will ultimately go if they're sitting here at 30, the way the board is broken down.
I'm with you. I think those are the four names. Those are the four best names. I don't think Malachi Starks is going to get much consideration here. I don't think he's a perfect scheme fit for the Bills in general. Revel would be exciting for me because you watch that AFC Championship game and it was just Bills receivers that could not get sticky with the fast Chiefs receivers, and this team that just could not play man coverage in spots where teams had a weakness against man coverage. And the secondary, the word you would describe it, even back in the Hyde Poyer days near the end, was slow.
Yeah.
And they could absolutely use some athleticism back there. They took a step toward that by adding Cole Bishop. I think a guy like Revel would be fantastic, and maybe he's not ready to play right away with the injury or a little bit of rawness, but that's what you have Dane Jackson or Tre'Davious White for. But I would endorse that pick. Kenneth Grant or Walter Nolan, I'd be okay with those picks. I would understand it. I wouldn't predict that's what the Bills do. Maybe this is just me. Like, I'm the kid on Christmas that's been asking his parents for a new Xbox, and the parents are like, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. I'm sitting there like taking anything as a sign that they're actually going to get me one. And then like, oh, dad went to the bank today. He's getting money out for the Xbox. Like that's what I'm doing with wide receiver. And I'm talking myself into wide receiver for the Bills, not just because I'm a wide receiver fanatic for the Bills. The Amari Cooper trade last year is a tell. They looked at their group of wide receivers and traded a third-round pick for Amari Cooper. And it didn't work out. They made it to the AFC Championship game, so workout can be whatever you want it to be, but he was losing snaps to Mac Hollins in that AFC Championship game, so the player didn't work out. But the idea is they took a look at their room and said they need to be better. Amari Cooper is no longer here. They also lost Mac Hollins, and unless you believe Joshua Palmer is some great answer, they need help. They just signed Josh Allen to an extension. Luther Burden would have been a top 10 pick if the draft happened in August. It didn't happen in August, but you know who else would have been a top 5 pick if the draft happened in August? Josh Allen and Ed Oliver. Those guys were both the number 1 guys on the draft board a year before the college football season started. I know Brandon Beane's a big guy on that. He obviously follows college football. But ultimately speaking, what do the Bills need? They need a separator. They need somebody that can play, has position versatility. Luther Burden played a lot of slot at Mizzou, but Luka and I both have said that we see him as an X. We see him as a Z. We see him as a guy that can line up all over the formation. There's some similarities in my mind to Stephon Diggs. There's some similarities in Luka's mind to Garrett Wilson. If the Bills want to address cornerback here with Revel, I feel like I would totally be okay with it. I would endorse it, and I would say, okay, get me a weapon in round two in one of your 2 picks. If they're not going to go Revel, I think we can eliminate the 2 defensive tackles here, Luke. I'm happy we're having the conversation, but it comes down to me, Revel versus Burden. And the last 2 years, Josh Allen has won out. He's gotten his guy. He's gotten Dalton Kincaid. He's gotten Keon Coleman. I think the Bills need to be greedy. I think they need to try to get a guy like Luther Burden. You talk about it all the time. Get that guy that you want to pay that second contract $30 million max deal to, and maybe it hits. And now you have 2 young receivers in the pipeline in Keon Coleman and Luther Burden. If one of them becomes a number 1, then you've struck gold. You give yourself more opportunity with the more that you pick. So I love the idea of Revel. They take him on draft night. I will stand up and applaud and get it. My vote right now, Luka, as the guy sitting across from you in the draft room, thinking of it through a Bills lens, is I think they would go with Luther Burden.
I'm just going to put it up on the board. Yeah. My favorite idea, it was Luther Burden, and everything else was secondary. No pun intended with the corner.
It wasn't secondary, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything went. Never mind.
It's just, let me put it this way. I think there's something to be said what you saw with them. You mentioned it, with them wanting to get Josh Allen someone he liked, and that was what we learned to be Keon Coleman. And I think they did have that tell, as you like to bring up, when it comes to trading for Amari Cooper early on in the season, because they immediately recognized we need to find something else that's a little bit different for this offense, because what we currently have, which is what it feels like we have once again going into the draft, is something that's just not good enough, especially in the capacity of playmaking, downfield playmaking, separation, all of these things where Keon Coleman, of course, can progress, but you can't just like absolutely live in that reality that it is exactly how it's going to be. You can't live in the reality of everything's okay, because Dalton Kincaid's finally making that big leap, as they believe he will finally this season, after what they thought was riddled with injury last year, even more severe than what people said, as it's been reported and all of such. I think the other part of this too is you saw a little bit of a model of success when it comes to what we saw with the Bengals. When it comes to, you drafted a receiver in the second round, that is great, but it's still not that X factor guy. Now, you don't have the luxury of what the Bengals had in that scenario when it comes to a top 5, top 10 pick, where you could get a guy like Jamar Chase. Jamar Chases don't grow on trees. They lucked out very much so when it comes to, their quarterback getting hurt, them losing a lot at that time, and them having Jamar Chase fall in their laps. But when you have a dynamic receiver, not again of Jamar Chase level, but a dog, a guy who can potentially have that ceiling of a true number 1 X guy, and Luther Burden sitting there at 30, which is something that feels like it never happens. And for whatever reason, he's falling. You have to pull the trigger. I can see that happening with Bean. Has shown that if he actually is as high on Luther Burden, he will get itchy as we're within 5 picks, maybe spend a day 3 pick in order to move up, just to ensure he secures his guy. Maybe they do that with Trey Amos as well, but ultimately I think the corners aren't necessarily where they are. The corners aren't there that are good enough that you want to do that. Luther Burden is good enough to do that for. He is absolutely everything you need him to be. And I know I brought up his name to you very early on in the process, and I have circled him for a long time. The last time I did that for a Bills prospect, I'm not going to say the name because I'm not trying to do that, but I know, he might have fallen down some draft boards and yet found his way to somewhere that I couldn't believe came full circle the way it did. And Luther Burden would be the home run of home runs. And it would be very, very difficult to sit there and not dream about Luther Burden, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, all of this. It's just a beautiful thing. And when the only red flag, in my opinion, being he got bored, he quit on the team in an Alabama blowout, there's a lot of things that I think will work themselves out, that if he walks into the Bills organization, if he walks into the Chiefs, or please, for the love of God, do not let Luther Burden be a Chief. If he walks into an organization of that caliber, you will never hear anything about how this guy's taking plays off, he's quitting, stuff like that. Teams of that caliber, that stature, do not allow players to have that even creep into their head. So I am not even remotely concerned about that. Luther Burden is the pick, Josh. And I think this board, the way it's worked out, it just coincidentally, I think would be an absolute massive success, and hopefully a complete 180 from what I am well documented in experiencing last year. And I cannot wait for next Thursday, that hopefully this maybe could happen for us.
Roy Collins in chat asking if it's a concern that most of his catches were within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. I don't believe that's an issue, Roy. It's kind of a spread offense at Mizzou. That's how they're designed. and the quarterback play at Mizzou was not very good. Brady Cook is not a great quarterback by any means, and he was actually injured injured the week before the Alabama game, and that's the game that Luther Burden quit on. But they were getting blown out with their backup quarterback on the road in Alabama. I think you can kind of understand why that would happen. Luca, what would you think about? Let's say there's a team in the 40s or 50s that has the Saints, I mean, the Jets, the Colts, has a really high grade on Jackson Dart, and they're willing to throw you a future one to go up and get their guy.
Whoa.
A future one, but then, maybe they only throw you like a third this year. You're kind of punting on the first round this year, but then you have 2 ones next year, one that could be pretty high. I would do it personally.
I think that's, if some team is willing to do that, yes. Ones are just too valuable. And as much as I love Luther Burden and the reality of Luther Burden most likely falling to 31, and oh my God.
They trade away from that, and then he goes to the Chiefs, and we're just like, here we go again, but we got the one.
The one is a lot different than what happened last season, though.
Yeah.
I would say. And as you put it, yes, if you have, say, the Saints doing that, or just looking at the board here, the Jets doing that, or Jets, maybe the Raiders, you have a team like that doing it.
The Steelers, if they don't go Sanders, something like that.
Steelers, if they don't go Sanders, although I probably wouldn't do it. The Steelers find a way to make the wild card or be really damn close to it no matter what. So,
yeah.
that's a mid-tier first round right out the gate. I don't know if that a first round's a first round. Don't get foolish here. But at the same time, if the Saints or the Jets or the Raiders are calling, you're taking that a lot more than a Steelers first round, as history shows. The value's too good. But man, as a fan, Brandon Beane should absolutely take that. That's the conversation we're having here. He should absolutely do it. And big picture, get my fan goggles off. Beane does a great job doing that.
Yeah.
Fan goggles back on. If Luther Burden all of a sudden falls to 31 or even is taken at 30 by someone else, this board worked out the same way, I'm going to be very salty about it for probably at least a day. I will not be happy about it.
Well, that is a great transition to remind all of you to tune in on Thursday to find maybe potentially salty Luka, who went a little viral with walking away when the Bills took the Chiefs before coming back and cussing out everybody in chat, not directly at them, but cussing his feelings. And we just helped him through it when the Bills trade away from Xavier Worthy. All right, Luka, we are live on the 18th. Excuse me. We are 6 days away from the NFL draft. We will be live. I will be eating pizza that night. Going to warn you all ahead of time. I'm already looking forward to it. I can taste it now. We'll be back on Thursday with the folks, ready to break down this beautiful thing that is the NFL draft. This was just our exercise to get everybody ready for it. We both had the Bills taking Luther Burden in this exercise, but all it takes is a Trey Amos to fall to the Bills or Luther Burden to go earlier than expected, and the whole thing gets thrown off. Jackson Dart to go early, somebody else gets pushed down. It's the beauty and the frustrating thing of the draft. Luka, I think it is the greatest reality show in all of sports because every single city, every single team's fan base is glued into it. And I'm just ready for it. I'm ready to see how it goes. And I'm rooting for the city of Green Bay because, much like Buffalo, you don't see cold weather, smaller market cities getting something like this. So I think that's kind of neat too.
The Green Bay factor of this all is what I'm excited about when it comes to a spectacle. But selfishly, I'm also just looking forward to sitting in front of a camera alongside you, Josh, and eventually our common buddy Stokes will be joining us as well during that live show. I just don't want last year to happen again. Please. Trading back is not what I mean by that. It just needs to be the certain circumstances that somehow all align that make it frustrating. I don't need that again. And we're doing it at a much later pick as well. It's going to be a long night, but it's a night that I know you and I really should have probably asked off for work the next day, but it'll be a fun one. I cannot wait. We mentioned it to start this live show, and anyone that's listening afterwards, we appreciate you stopping by to listen in to see what we've done. But overall, this is the best week for you and I when it comes to our Bills fandom, NFL fandom, everything as a whole, that this is going to be great.
Absolutely, Avery. She wants to, or she, I'm assuming she, but whoever, for the chat live show, can you compare to your guesses? Absolutely. We will, throughout the night, every pick that happens, we will be saying, I would have done this. This is what we did in the mock draft. That is what we do. And for those that don't know, on these draft live shows, we are doing this all through not mainly a Bills lens. So like tonight, when cornerbacks start falling off the board, we'll be like, that's bad for the Bills. So if you just wanted to hear about the draft from a Bills perspective, from two Bills fans, we'll be there. But we railed on it when the Lions took Jack Campbell. Admittedly, we railed on it when the Lions took Jahmyr Gibbs. Oops. Our bad.
Didn't see that one coming.
He was worth every penny, and then some. He's won me a couple of fantasy football championships, though, so I'll forgive him. But yes, that's what we'll be doing on Thursday night. We hope you will be tuning in. We will be live right when the draft starts. For Luka, I am Josh McCarty. This has been our third annual NFL mock draft show, and we will talk to you Thursday night for the 2025 NFL Draft.